Puthalath, an expert in technical documentation with over 20 years of experience. She is passionate about product documentation, tools, and process improvements that drive team success.
Today, she will demystify OKRs, a strategy to achieve goals, why they matter, how they align with documentation, and how to measure them effectively. Let's all now welcome Menka.
Hello everyone. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. So starting with why am I here today and why do I want to talk about OKRs? Something probably most of you might have heard, or at least you might be familiar with SMART goals and things like that. During our appraisal cycles, most of us are put through creating SMART goals and all of that, right? So when I first learned about OKRs, I found them to be a very powerful tool, I would say, not just to help us achieve our goals, but also to showcase the value the documentation team brings to the organization. Many a times we are questioned, if not questioned, at least there are doubts around what is it, or at least documentation used to be an afterthought in most of the organizations that I have been a part of. Sorry. So I feel OKRs give us a very strong method to go about and show to the organization as documentation writers or as a documentation team, what is it that we can achieve, right? So it brings value to what we are doing. Basically, I'll go a little slow. I have around 20 slides to cover, and we'll talk about how OKRs can be framed, why we need OKRs in the first place, and we will also see some examples of our documentation specific goals and how we can transform them into OKRs. Okay, so starting with teams use OKRs to define their objectives and how they will reach those objectives. So OKRs, as we know, it is just an acronym for objectives and key results. So going ahead. Okay, so basically objectives and key results, OKRs, encourage us to set ambitious goals. So why are we saying ambitious goals? Why are they not our business as usual goals? You know, and one of the reasons for that is we use OKRs not to showcase our daily work. This is actually a framework that is used to bring out the aspirational side of what documentation teams can achieve. So that's why we are beginning with OKRs encourage to set ambitious goals. And OKRs enable to bring out the clarity in the process, because what happens when you start defining your key results, right? You begin to think clearly from vague goals, you move into clarity to say what is it that will give me, a platform to showcase what is it that we are achieving. What goals are we after and how are we going to achieve them? That comes out when you begin with the OKR. And OKRs need to be reviewed or revised at frequent intervals, and we'll see more of that. Okay, so understanding the OKR framework. Before we go deep into the framework, I just want to call out that we need to understand how did the OKRs come about, because it's not something that's very new and it's not something that's been there forever times. So when I read on OKRs before, while preparing for this presentation, and also while we experimented with OKRs in my previous organization, we realized that OKRs have been there from 1970s, and Andrew Gower is known as the father of OKRs, and though he started that at Intel, and Intel was able to actually move, or rather go forward because of OKRs or this methodology. Andrew's session inspired another person called John and he went ahead and he has published this book called Measure What Matters. And in that book, he explains this framework. So we'll see what we can get out of this session. So basically, as we understood, it is a goal-setting framework. It allows us to define and track our objectives. And what are these objectives going to be? And why is documentation a strong contestant for such a framework, right? We'll see that as well. So when you say objectives, we are actually defining as part of OKRs, they have to be qualitative goals. So we are not looking at something quantifiable as part of the objective itself, meaning the objective remains qualitative. And we'll see some examples of that. Okay, so when you have an objective, you go ahead and define the key results that will help you achieve that objective. So when you define the key results, that is where your quantitative part of your definition comes in. So that is why we are saying key results are quantitative and they help you measure success through specific metrics associated with the objectives. Obviously, by itself, just by defining the objectives or by defining the key results, we are not going to achieve anything. We have to come up with the steps that are needed to achieve those objectives. And when we define key results, we are not going to define key results only as the steps to achieve. Key results are not the steps. Key results is not the plan. It is not the strategy. Key results are supposed to be the outcomes that you expect so that you are able to quantify how you are meeting the objective. What are the benefits of the framework? This framework obviously promotes alignment, engagement, and accountability within teams. And I was surprised to learn that to doc teams, the OKR framework is actually coming a bit slow. In many companies, many product companies, the engineering and product management teams do function in an OKR framework kind of thing. They may not be technically calling it out even as OKR, but they are following that framework when they set their goals and objectives. So I think this is a great thing to learn about and implement if we can. In fact, I think if any of us can go back and look at how we are achieving goals in our documentation teams, how we are bringing value, how we are showcasing that value or the impact, that would be a plus for all of us. John, as I mentioned, in his book, Measure What Matters, he actually brings out the benefits. He counts it out as facts. F stands for focus, A for alignment, C for commitment, T for, I'm sorry, I forgot what T stands for, but T is more like what is the transformational change that you are showing, and S stands for how you are going to, the steps required to achieve that. Okay, so before we dive more deep and look at examples, I would like to understand, based on whatever we have covered so far, if any of you have any thoughts to share about what do you think, or from your own knowledge of what you may know about OKRs, what do you think about OKRs? Anybody?
So my name is Milan. So Menka, what I'm understanding is that here OKRs are there to define, basically what are the goals we are setting. And I also heard you say that we need to set some ambitious goals, not just the basic ones. So I'm trying to, get an example. I would love if you can share with an example. And I also heard you say that it's there from 1970s and somebody from Intel, John, and one more guy, I forgot his name, Measure to some book you referred. So I think they started, and I am also understanding that it's not just the documentation team, any other team like development or anybody in the organization, and I feel even otherwise in personal life also I felt that it can be set and we can measure and we can move forward. Yeah, this is a bit of my understanding.
Thanks for that, Meera. Definitely, I have also seen examples. So when I was searching for what sort of examples could I present in the session today, I did look at several examples where professionally people are using, but even personally people are actually setting goals. So one thing that I want to call out is when you have these goals, right, or something that we are using, basically the objectives can be categorized into three categories. One is your committed goals, another is your inspirational goals, and the third goal is your learning goal. So learning related goals were more personal or individualistic goals, I would say. So thanks for that. Anybody else wants to share anything, or do we move on?
Hi. Hello. So what I think OKR is and how it helps us is, yeah, we do set a final goal that we reach into, but the steps that we take in between, it helps us, make us follow goals and achieve them, and that would help us measure it, what we did throughout our way to reach that final goal. So yes, it keeps us on track, keeps us focused, and as you said, helps us measure each step that we take. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's my understanding of OKR.
Perfectly right. And definitely measurement is a big part, and that helps actually showcase the value that we are bringing, right? So let's move on. Thanks for that. Okay, so before we learn how to create OKRs, and I share more examples of OKRs related to documentation, we need to also understand that where objectives and key results might seem like a very straightforward thing, that okay, you come up with a goal and you find out the steps that you need, you create the outcomes, and you start thinking of how you're going to measure them. But before we even get there is some amount of homework that needs to be done, and this we learned based on our own experience in my former company. And one thing that we did well and which helped us actually create really good OKRs was that we had done the homework of understanding what is it that is expected from the documentation team. So based on where we saw ourselves a year or 2 years down the line, what were the things that we had to consider to cut down the pain points, right? So we considered all of that. We also collaborated cross-functionally to come up with what is it that the company expects from the documentation team, and based on that, we went ahead and reframed our OKRs. Some of the OKRs we actually prolonged for up to 2 years of a period, whereas the other OKRs which were more achievable within a year, but they were still inspirational and aspirational, we were able to achieve those within 1 year itself. So let's go ahead and see some examples. Okay, so why is it that we are considering documentation goals and we are aligning those with OKRs, right? So, and how do we go about it? So these steps, actually, these are step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and these are based on my experience. How did we go about creating these objectives, right? So initially, like I said, after doing the homework, we identified the key initiatives as objectives, and we involved cross-functional teams. We spoke to product support team, we spoke to our professional services team, the team that was dealing with the customers, and we also spoke to the PMs to figure out what is it that they feel documentation team should be doing better. So that was the step 1. And then we listed the outcomes as key results. So we captured the steps. So while listing the outcomes as key results, like say for example, we got to know that our internal reviewers found it difficult to review the content using Google Docs, and they wanted something simpler, meaning Google Docs was simpler, but then we were doing a lot of back and forth with them over Google Docs and Oxygen XML editor and all of that, right? So when we figured that out, we created one of the objectives as changing our tech stack, moving to a CCMS kind of thing. So we were able to capture the steps that we need to understand and perform against to reach those objectives. We also defined the metrics, and defining the metrics was a challenge plus an interesting thing, I would say, because we involved the entire doc team to define the objectives, to define the key results that we were after, and not just that. Even the metrics, it was not like somebody as a manager decides that, okay, fine, this is the objective I want you to run after, these are your key result areas, and these are the metrics you need to report against. We didn't go that way. The best thing about OKRs is, it is not a top-down approach that, okay, fine, I have defined it for you, you go ahead and achieve it and show me what you can do. It is more involving in that sense. Everybody in the team gets to discuss what is it that we are after. before we frame these objectives, and how are we going to achieve it when we frame the key results, and same goes for metrics. We ensure that the team, each individual within the team who is going to be accountable for a certain goal or certain objective gets to define how are they going to show progress. And I think that is very empowering for individuals because one, you end up feeling valued, your team ends up feeling that they are actually contributing to the success of the team. It binds the team closer together. Those were, I would say, wonderful experiences while we explored how to use OKRs. And we also engaged the stakeholders. Of course, you cannot do something, as I mentioned earlier, you use OKRs as a methodology to showcase your value. How are you going to showcase your value? By engaging your stakeholders, right? So you will have to ensure that you share regular updates and you solicit feedback and then act on that feedback. So sometimes the feedback could also lead you to refining your OKR or refining the key results that you have defined. Because initially when we set things, we are going with at least a certain set of assumptions, though you are doing your homework. But beyond that, how do we go about it is what we'll see next. Okay, so these are I'm going to share two of the actual OKRs that we created. And I think this might be a deja vu kind of thing for two of my ex-colleagues here, Uttam and Shashi. So we had this content refresh as one of our aspirational goal, and we wrote it down as an OKR, and we wanted to ensure at that point in time we were actually implementing acrolinks, and we wanted acrolinks to be able to score or rate our content. So this is the way we framed our objective statement. If you can, I'm not going to read it out because I think we are going to anyway share these slides, but what I want you to understand here or focus on here is our objective was inspirational, and it wasn't something that we are, leaving it for the next 2 years or something. We wanted to ensure that 100% of our published content has a score higher than or equal to 80. And Acrolinks was going to help us get those scores. So in the first place, our first key result was to implement the Acrolinks tool for all the authors, right? And we were using the metric of calculating how many authors are we able to move to Acrolinks per month, or how many are ready to use that. Then we had another one, content rewrite. So the reason I have categorized it separately again because we went ahead and we realized that what we were trying to achieve in that key result of content rewrite could be an entire objective itself separately. So that's the reason we then further broke it down and we created another objective out of that content rewrite to be able to use metrics to track that effectively. And we also had another one as part of content refresh. I think some of us would have come across having to rewrite error messages and all that. So we wanted to ensure we are able to do that. And for that, the metrics we used was the count per month. How many error messages were we able to rework on? Another one is the content deprecation. Of course, all of us end up having old content in our doc portal. So we wanted to ensure that the old outdated content doesn't remain on our doc portal for a very long period. So we went ahead and we created an OKR. Of course, nobody in the company is actually behind us to ensure that we remove this content. So the reason this becomes inspirational or aspirational is because this was something that the doc team decided we would want to do as a value add from our side to keep our stuff updated. We didn't want people to come back years later and tell us you have outdated content out there. And we used the metrics of using the percentage to calculate how much of audit was done of such content, identifying that content, and then removing the old and outdated content. Okay, so why do we need to use OKRs for documentation? Of course, OKRs bring about clarity. They give you the direction you want to head in. And if you see, generally, documentation goals tend to be vague. Like, we are told when we join a company, senior leaders and managers are given the task of, we want you to create world-class documentation. We want you to improve the quality of the documentation. So how do you break this into steps that you can take? How do you showcase what is it that you're trying to achieve there? So that comes with, if you start thinking in terms of OKRs. Prioritize initiatives for quality. You may have 10 things to do as your daily tasks, right? But how do you move beyond that, and how do you, how do you prioritize between those tasks to say, these are the top 5 initiatives that the doc team is going to be responsible for this period of time. So that comes with OKR thing. Of course, you can measure your goals, and it brings about a culture of continuous improvement. And again, that is something I think as people and as writers who have come here today for such sessions and all that, I'm sure all of us are continuously trying to improve what we do. Similar thing applies to how as a team we are delivering within the organization. So that is why OKRs help to bring that kind of improvement plan. Okay, so let's look at some common doc goals. Improve documentation quality, as I mentioned earlier, increase documentation coverage, reduce customer support tickets, improve content discoverability, enhance internal documentation workflows. You could pick up any of these and do an exercise of creating an OKR after we are done with the session. Okay, so I'll speed up a little bit because there is some more content that I want to cover here. The first one, if we see, I have given this as an example of how we can write the objective for improving documentation quality. What are the key results? These are samples, or consider them as example statements. When you want to refine or do something at your organization, you could look at this and improve and come up with a refinement in your terms. What works for your team and your organization? Here also, this is for doc coverage. Again, I have provided the objective and the key results here. And how do you go about ensuring that you are providing documentation for the features as and when needed? This one is an important one, so I'll spend a little extra time here. We are saying reduce support tickets. Of late, in the last few years, what I have seen is companies are asking documentation writers or the doc teams to show how are they impacting or enabling our support teams, right? So in that sense, I think this might be another aspirational one, where you will be able to showcase the value. If you, of course, you need the support of the support team, because when we implemented this, we ensured that the support team tagged their tickets specific to documentation. They get so many tickets, right? So we wanted them to call out which are documentation specific tickets and in which category they fall. Either it's incomplete documentation or incorrect documentation. If it was incorrect or outdated, then that would land into another objective of ours, right? So we did some exercise with the support team there to come up with these KRs. Okay, and there are some thoughts on metrics. I know most of us now feel that we are responsible for sharing how we are doing, right? Or how the team is performing. All of us are at least closer to the appraisal time. All of us like to look at, okay, what have I achieved in the last 1 year? And of course managers look at it with a magnifying glass. So when you look at metrics, if you are creating OKRs and if you are creating the key results and you are thinking of what metrics to include, please do consider these things. Rewards and measurements can lead to unintended consequences. That's known as Cobra effect. So which basically means not every time when you say that, okay, if you are reducing these many support tickets which are for documentation quality, you are going to be rated higher for that. In that sense, there could be people who may, and I'm not saying that somebody would do it intentionally, but it could happen that people might pick up outdated content just to reflect that they have been doing a lot of cleanup. So that is what is Cobra effect, where unintended consequences can happen. Metrics definitely can be manipulated. I think some of us have experienced that. That is why it is important that wherever you can use automation to come up with the metrics, it will be a plus if you are using the OKR framework. We tend to influence what we measure, that is Hawthorne effect. And what happens is, like, see, when we, suppose I'm talking to a friend, obviously I'm going to be very candid and I'm going to speak whatever comes to my mind. But if I'm put on a stage, I'm going to take a second to think what I'm going to speak next, right? So that is what is Hawthorne effect. So when we are put under a scanner, when we know our performances are being measured, how do we perform? So people change their behavior based on whether they are being watched, whether they are being accounted for. So OKR framework makes people accountable for what they are doing. So as managers or as leads, even as tech writers, I think the onus is on us to ensure our behavior, irrespective of whether we are being watched or not, remains consistent, right? So and as managers, we should be conscious of that. And what is the true value of any metric that we bring in? That's something we should be very conscious of. If we are saying, I'm going to track how much time it takes for me to publish content, right? You can't be doing it at random. You need to have a methodology to track that frequently or at frequent intervals. Okay, so going ahead with the recap. OKRs help translate fuzzy documentation goals into clear measurable outcomes. And we use specific relevant metrics to track each key result. And in that sense, generally, when we create these objectives and key results, we try that there is one objective and it has 3 to maximum 5 key results. We don't let it spill over 5 because then it becomes difficult to track. And definitely, it gives you a lot of team visibility. It helps improve the team's performance, and that's something even we saw in our when we implemented this. The entire team came into a culture of thinking, okay, what is it that I can do to improve the visibility for my team throughout the organization? And it's not like, just blowing your own trumpet, but also trying to make that difference. And when documentation teams can make that difference, it is definitely empowering. And definitely you get alignment across product and content. We do not create OKRs in isolation. And that's something I think we have to be mindful of. Review and refine OKRs regularly for continuous improvement. That is why we solicit feedback from our PMs or teams which are handling customers, or even from customer feedback, right? Based on customer feedback, we reprioritize our OKRs if and when needed. We rework on the key results if we need to. Okay, so what are some of the challenges that you can encounter if you go ahead with this approach? One of the things is definitely how you define your objectives. They need to be concise, they need to be specific, and like I mentioned, you should ideally have inspirational OKRs, right? So your objective should be inspirational. It should be something that you aspire for. But does that mean we do not create OKRs for our regular work? No. We need to have our business as usual also reflected as part of our OKRs. Otherwise, we might be too busy running after aspirational OKRs, and our focus may go down from what we need to achieve to stay alive within the company, right? So the one way to do that is make your business as usual OKRs more aspirational. So draft it like that. And these are the best practices that you need to collaborate. You start with a baseline, you keep it realistic, and you review or reassess your OKRs based on the changes. That's it. Open to questions.
Thank you, Menka. Now the floor is open for questions.
I just have one question. So basically, do you use any kind of a template? Do you circulate it into the team when you give these OKRs? Because I normally use a Notion template, and it has a lot of customizable OKRs. And now, coming to the reality of the question, say for example, I have been given an OKR, like create an onboarding guide using Pendo. So what would be the objective is create an onboarding guide using Pendo. The key results would be what, and what would be the tasks in that case?
Okay.
Just a real time
So
example.
onboarding guide using Pendo, right? So first of all, you have to ensure that whoever is going to meet that objective is trained in Pendo, knows how to do it. So that could be your first outcome, where you are looking at training somebody on how to go about it. Second could be, by when are you targeting to have that user guide? And to create a user guide, obviously the basic is that the person knows what product or what feature that person needs to create the user guide on. So that person needs to have hands-on experience on that. So that could be your another KR where you say, okay, the person is trained on Pendo, the person has experience or understands the feature to the extent that the person is capable of creating a user guide. And then would come your outcome of creating and ensuring that it is created and it is approved by the team that's supposed to approve it.
Yeah, hi. So, not exactly a question, but some reflections. You were saying that these OKRs cannot be created in a silos, like we have to involve everybody. So we are actually doing that. We are moving whole of our product, into a cloud, and there are a lot of clients, and so there's a lot of deadlines and all of that. So one of the things you mentioned on the slide was, like tagging the documentation, and so that we reduce and we give our impact, for reducing the support tickets. So what is happening currently is that, like for example, hundreds of tickets are created by the product. Everywhere the documentation team is tagged. So we are gradually, training them to not tag on each and every, because each and every ticket is tagged means how much work will be there for us to go through to triage it, to see the impact. So we are gradually, we want to involve everybody in the OKR and see that effect, see the impact and value of documentation. But on the other hand, we also don't want them to put everything on us.
Throw things on us, right?
Yeah. So that's one. Another thing is this OKR, not for the whole team we are doing, but even for the appraisal thing. Luckily, I have got a very good boss, and we are sitting and dividing it. For example, we have to show critical thinking. How do we show it? How do we measure it? So I could relate and resonate with a lot of your things, and yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
nice to know. Regarding the support thing, we also had similar challenges. So initially, the support team started tagging documentation, just one tag documentation for all their roles, right?
Yeah.
So then we went back to them. We strategized with seniors within the support team, and they, of course, went back to their team to figure out what kind of tickets are they seeing for documentation.
Yeah.
We ensure that they break down the tags. They just don't tag the documentation. Yeah, either it is missing documentation, or it is incorrect documentation, or it is something that the customer searched but could not find on the doc portal. So when we started categorizing it that way, then it became easier for us to track that.
Yeah, that's a useful, useful advice. So I will also say we are just in the beginning stage. So first of all, they were never adding it. Now when they are adding, like okay, you told no, now do it like that. It's that. So it's a process. I think we'll get there slowly. Thank you. It was very useful.
That's it.
Thank you, Menka.